can't say. So if you really want to test me, the only way to test me is to earn the right to go there. So I welcome you. So the third one is your idea of my connection with Donna Haraway. I haven't read Donna Haraway in many, 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 many years. I mean, so I don't think I'm going to explain. I mean, that's an exam topic, isn't it? My problem is that I get so occupied with writing whatever I think and doing all of this, stuff that I was describing as Gore Kebone Mustarano, that I don't read a lot of books anymore. I do read primary texts again and again, Kant and Marx. I try to read. I'm really reading again because television, Calcutta television, is bringing out Devi Chaudhurani, Bankim Chandra, and I know that they're going to make a mess of it. I think I'm going to find the old thing and read it again as I read it as a child, so that my job of reading now is either primary material or old texts that when I read them, I didn't understand what they were saying. And I do not read a lot of, material that's pretty much unilateral, stuff, my colleagues, my friends, more or less on the same level, teaching me an insight here and an insight there. I don't read a lot. So I cannot give you an answer to that question. Private sphere, public sphere, of course, I could give an answer, which again would take some time, and I don't think I'm going to right now. But let me say that this work that I do in the schools, which I have been doing now for, as I say, now close to 30 years, it's something that I don't approve of. So there again, you get a sense of, theoretically, you get a sense of how hard it is to be theoretically correct. It's private sector voluntarism. A person with my politics cannot approve of private sector voluntarism, but that's what I do. So I'll just let this mark the moment for this private-public question, and maybe I'll read up some more Donna Haraway one of these days and answer your question then. So if there are more questions, it's yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor. But I have a few questions about who wants to live without borders. So Swiss are the most famous, national group, and so are the Han Chinese. Mm-hmm. And the China built the Great Wall, and to keep away, the people who are not within the border. And others who want to have no border with the state, like Africans, South Asians. I think there are so many Indians, dying to live in India. I think Nira Chaudhary said that millions and millions of Indians are living in India under duress. But United States wants to have only, brainy intellectuals like you and Amartya Sen and others, and other IIT graduates. Not all the people from Bihar, bordering Nepal. And all Nepalese want to leave Nepal, but they are here under duress. So it is those who are poor, who have no wherewithal, to have dignified life. And there is another novel by the author Catch-22. The novel is called Take This. There he talks about the uses of poverty. You are talking about as if being the children of the rich and successful parents is a crime. But those children who are born in successful families, they did not choose to be born in the rich families. And millions of the poor, of course, they also had no choice to be born in the poor families. So there are uses of poverty. Let's see, there is a borderless world international government which has distributed the wealth of the world, and everybody is equally rich. But in no time, those who are given the wealth will squander it.
Yes.
They will fall into the lowest, meager livelihood. So this do-gooding kind of attitude, let people earn their wealth, their affluence, their success, and feel good about it, and trying to erase poverty like erasing the border. I think it's a fine idea, utopian dream, and utopias are always, exciting things for literary scholars and intellectuals. And who wants the borderless world? Only those deprived, like the poem in the Statue of Liberty has the quadrate, give us the
You're poor, you're
deprived
etc.
and humble and poverty-stricken masses. But the rich countries, Swiss will never. There was a referendum in the last Swiss election. They wanted to have all the African or brownie-skinned people to be expelled from Swiss border. And China will be the first nation. In their vocabulary, there are only two countries in the world. One is Chunko, that is China, and the other is Waigo, non-Chinese.
Foreign country.
Japanese. They say,
It's not non-Chinese, it's foreign country. Waigo is not non-Chinese. I'm sorry.
Why means
foreign.
Properly,
Why means foreign. I'm sorry. We say Bengalis and non-Bengalis, but Waigo does not mean non-Chinese.
Anyway, like gaijin, in Chinese, in Japanese, they have the same, Chinese Waigo.
Now come to your question, because I want to get more questions. I understand your critical position. You don't like what I say, but I'll carry on. Okay. Now, the thing is, you are completely right. But as having the same attitude and identifying them with the government and not doing anything about it, it's not you call me a do-gooder and you think I'm trying to erase poverty. What I was trying to say was, I'm trying to change minds. You will notice the guy at the airport yesterday commented on the fact that I had a very cheap phone. And you'll notice that I'm not wearing ironed clothes. This damn thing, I had this sari when I was in Presidency College 50 years ago. So the thing is, you can choose not to be a mad consumerist. That's a different thing. What I'm trying to do is to change minds some, because these people, so that's what a teacher does, especially a teacher of literature. This is not do-gooding. And let me assure you, I hate excusing myself from basically a criticism that focuses on large groups as having motives that are not good. We are okay, but the Chinese are crummy and the Swiss are crummy. When I was asked by the Stiftung Dialogik in 1997 in Zurich to give the talk which would change from the old looking after and giving asylum to the sufferers from the Holocaust, the Third Reich, into this kind of giving asylum to Rwandans and Afghans and so on and so forth. There are good Swiss. These are good Swiss people who were just as critical. Like I said, I'm critical of India. So what I say to everyone is join before beginning to dismiss entire countries in a really, I'm not going to use the nasty adjective, but in that way, as if they all think the same and the government represents exactly what each individual thinks. We who are teachers of literature, when we move into areas where there is opposition, I always ask them, people who are trying to change Bangladesh, say, look at here, I work with the feminist movements in Bangladesh. Join with them, those who are inside the country trying to change, rather than always come in from the top or criticize the entire country as having one motive. So that particular engagement with the Swiss, I did indeed do a great deal of research. Then another piece you will see where people who are beloved as sort of socialist models, Scandinavian countries. The year that the Babri Masjid was destroyed, I was speaking in Switzerland, and there are, not Switzerland, sorry, Sweden, there are very detailed descriptions given of how Swiss law is changing in the face of all of these unnecessary asylum seekers coming in. But who helped me to get these figures? The Swedes themselves, the newspaper Dagens Nyheter. It's not as if inside these countries, I think it's wrong to dismiss these countries in this kind of a nationalist way. Now, who wants to travel in a borderless world? A borderless world is not a place where one necessarily travels. I say again and again to people like Lisa Lowe that they think that the whole world wants to actually come to Euro-US as a kind of asylum, like manifest destiny, that they should think about people who have no interest in moving, okay? So in fact, there in Birbhum, where it's a small example, but it's a very deep case study if you want to talk sociological nonsense. There in Birbhum, there are people who don't even want to go at the behest of ruling class folks to Vellore. They want to remain where they are. So I'm not denying the desire to remain rooted. And all of the stuff about IIT, you have no idea how much at the American Anthropological Association annual convention in Montreal on November 17th, there was a very detailed documented paper about how the IITians from Chennai and from elsewhere are in fact worked so that they become heads in Silicon Valley. So it's not like nobody knows this. But the woman who wrote it is herself a Tamil Brahmin from inside, right? So it's not like nobody knows this. But to be critical in this way of a whole group and discourage people from trying to break into changing minds so that people will want something else. You go to Dubai and you want to say, and there also I have spoken in this way, that people should be taught to want something else. I will not want what the financial sector wants in the United States. And that can be done only if people like us really, instead of criticizing other countries as if they're monoliths, begin to see how all around the world there are people who are eager to actually make the same kind of criticism, but not in terms of identifying folks with one kind of desire from a clear and transparent political perspective that is not really very informed. So this is what I would say. Of course, I'm not anything. As for Neeraj Chaudhary, he's dead. And when he died, he was over 100 years old. And he was he was an accomplished man, but he was a very vain man. He was really talking about his own sense of his family and his excellence as representing everything about the relationship between India. He thought East Bengal was Bengal. He thought Bengal was India, and he thought India was the world. And it is in that context that he wrote, "This mistake I hope I do not make. I'm roughly from the same part of the world, and I think we have a problem. I've heard again and again, even yesterday, that all the best thinkers come from that part of the world, and that is not so. I've encountered some rather bad thinkers from East Bengal." So to an extent, this would be my answer, my real answer. Do not think about people as having a kind of morality play face with only one kind of motive, which history tells you, a certain kind of reading of history. I invite all of you to come to the Institut Français in Chandanagar, which has just opened. Rila Mukherjee and I are working together, basically to undercut this way of thinking about the world and deciding what to do or not to do. Even if we are making a mistake, let's be a little charitable. After all, we are not heads of state here, unless someone is lurking under the table. So we are not making international policy. We, as citizens of the world, can afford to make a mistake on the side of charity rather than close discussion by diagnosing a mindset to people whose names we hardly know. We can have facts about elections and so on. Disputed elections, I've been writing about that too, but unfortunately I can't give you the whole shebang now because, once again, one of you will say, I'm only a literary do-gooder. I am a literary do-gooder, but that doesn't stop you from listening to me.
Small question, I'm Sirish Pradhan from PTA. Do you envision a world towards the end of the 21st century, a world without a passport and without the barriers of a currency, a culture, and a language?
Thank you. It's not going to happen, see? And this is the utopia business. It's a very practical and solid question. What I was trying to say, now look, if you really want to think about borders, there's a difference between borders and frontiers. To an extent, and I agree with you, I mean, my mother, because my brother was a surgeon in the United States, she was obliged, because he declared her as a dependent, she was obliged to take citizenship. But she was she was a very strong, wonderful woman. Instead of just talking about South Asia nonstop, when she became a citizen, she felt that she needed to do something, just as she did a great deal of social work when she was in Calcutta. She gave more than 10,000 hours of voluntary work to traumatic stress syndrome Vietnam War veterans. So to an extent, can you hear me if I scream? No. Yes.
It'll come
You can?
It'll
Okay.
come within 1 second.
Okay, but let me continue to speak. There we go. Yes, you have a generator. And think, all this time that I was in Birbhum, there's no electricity. So, and there was one person who had taken electricity. No, there are people hooked from the local whatchamacallits. Now, if anybody here has read my Death of a Discipline, they will see, if you have read the Seagull edition, the Indian edition, with a much more interesting price, then you haven't seen this picture. But on the US version, there is a picture by Rajiv Lochan, a photograph, who's the head of the modern art thing in Delhi, where in a building in Delhi, about 150 cables are going to the lamppost. They are so-called stealing electricity, enlightenment. And I've said this is a picture of civil disobedience. I mean, if 150 of them take light like this, who's gonna punish anyone? So that's why that picture is there. So but in Birbhum, these people, why do they take electricity from the thing? Because so that their sons and daughters can pass the matric and all that kind of stuff, right? And in that kind of fierce heat, to have a little table fan kind of rolling along very slowly. One person was fined and put in jail, and so all of them have to. So what's civil disobedience? No civil disobedience. It's possible when you're collective. That's a subaltern. Collective in Delhi. But it's not possible when the police come down and take it away, when the state is unable, except for below the poverty line. And the poverty line is a joke there. So that most of these poor, landless people, they're APL, above the poverty line. So they're not getting electricity. So therefore, that's why, as a kind of symbolic gesture, I speak, because after all, I learned to speak without all this electricity stuff. And in fact, at Occupy Wall Street, I'm coming to the answer, a wonderful question. Occupy Wall Street, they asked me to speak on the Global Solidarity Day. The police don't allow them mics or megaphones or lights or anything, right? So there it is, dark as dark can be, and I say something, it's called a people's mic, like 1,000 people right in front, take it up and say it. Then the 1,000 people right behind them, take that up and say it. And so the guy in front of me is going to be, don't speak again, don't speak. So while all of these people have said what I have said, then I'm allowed to speak another half sentence. So it doesn't just happen to the Birbhumiyas who are afraid. It also happens to people who will not be denied access to this kind of stuff. So every little moment becomes symbolic. Now, what I was saying to you, brother, was that this is the borderlessness notion is something one must think about and not give, because suppose in the borderlessness that's promised by capitalist globalization, you really communicate easily. What will you have? You will have 2 or 3 big languages. How can we deny the world's wealth of languages? So that to an extent, that kind of borderlessness, where you already almost have some big internet languages, people like us will have to supplement that by emphasizing deep language learning and so on. We cannot be global. Literature is not global. Literature may be global in ways of this universalizable rather than universal that I was speaking about yesterday. But we have to do this kind of supplementation through language learning. You're not paying attention to me, I can see, because you wanted to silence me. But the thing is, no, I'm not saying there should be only big languages. But in contradiction as they are, all our life is in contradiction. We start dying as soon as we are born. My mother used to say, we're looking at a newborn baby, the only thing certain in its life is it's going to die. So to an extent, our entire life is working with a contradiction. The contradictory commands come down every minute. Any parent who has ever reared a child knows this. So to that extent, no, of course not. It's not some kind of a literal blueprint. It is, in fact, utopia. Utopia, it must be remembered, is no place. Utopia does not happen. That's the U. And in fact, you can make a mistake in it and turn that U into an EU in Greek, like, that evangelicalism, euangelion, right? so that you make it good place, right? Gospel, EU, but that's a spelling mistake. That's a grounding error, as it were. Utopia itself, if you don't remember that utopia cannot happen, then you're either a fool or a knave. And so the idea of borderlessness is that kind of an idea. And also, when, the Doctors Without Borders, they're called, as somebody already tells me from the back, Médecins Sans Frontières. I always translate them Doctors Without Frontiers. Why? Because they're wonderful people, but they cannot become a substitute for primary healthcare from inside. And so my one experience of this has been in Bangladesh at the time of the cyclone, 1991. So there was a barefoot teacher and myself and boat people. We were actually carrying in a trawler rice and lentils from the EU. Not a very politically correct thing, but people must eat. So we are moving along in a trawler. And then as the trawler finally is able, it took a very long time because the tides are high there, finally docks, there are millions of women, not millions, but I would say scores of women, and you can smell the corpses. There's scores of women slipping and sliding on the ice-like mud in that area. They're coming, they have heard that there's a woman here who speaks Bengali. And they're saying to me, sister, we want to die, they're treating us like animals. Now, how is this happening? The lair in Bangladesh that knows a little bit of English but couldn't make it into the big world speaks in the same disappointed tones as anybody who dismisses all huge collectivities as having one attitude. They, of course, treat the ones who are completely at the bottom, especially women, like animals. So they're mistranslating to the damn Doctors Without Borders. And so the Doctors Without Borders are treating them in a way also that they're used to in hospitals where we thank the doctor for probing into our genitals. I know what's happening, but this kind of thing, it seems to me, has to be looked at in terms of borders and frontiers. For them, there is no problem going from one place to another. So yes, I'm certainly not talking about a kind of insane utopian, do I seem that stupid? Insane utopian borderlessness where there are only a few languages and no passports and so on and so forth. I insist, as I said before, this is a thought that needs to be thought as doable but perhaps never possible in a mode of the future anterior, rather than keep insisting on national competitiveness, defining other nations as monolithic, whereas at home we take advantage of the internal borders where the babus and the babulettes, and now even the female babulettes with TTES, are doing what they want to do, whereas gendered and classed, they are looking after the others. That's all that I was saying. And I would say another thing. It would be more interesting, I say this to my students, I'm so old, I have students since I started teaching at the age of 23, I have students who are older than I, and I'm going to be 70 in February, so you will forgive me if I say something slightly irascible. One learns much more if one doesn't think of contradicting the person who is speaking right away. It's a real male model kind of thing. I want to win. You may be rich and famous, but I can think better than you. It doesn't help the person who's thinking the question. When I'm in a situation where there's a great deal of hostility, when I go back, I will try to think of in what ways they were right. And it seems to me that that's the only way to learn. And so I tell you, if there's someone else left in the room who wants to ask me a question which simply points out my obvious faults, that I'm a literary critic, I live in the United States, that the idea of borderlessness is not a practicable idea, and all of these things, I think it would be better to think of something to say where, without cringing or kind of whining, you can agree with what I was saying. That's it. I'm coming to you, but I want to hear Vaijayanti because I want to be a genitalist. I want to hear the woman, Dr. nobody else. And you also. Vaijayanti and BT, and then you. Come along.
Thank you, Professor. First, of course, I would like to say that your speaking was a fantastically multi-layered and entirely, multidisciplinary stimulating talk. But I would also like to say where my question comes from, so that the question is put in perspective.
Just a little bit.
I'm an Indologist and art historian, a management person, engaged in private sector for many years, then into non-private, which is looking after economic relations between these two countries, and been in the academic region where I was greatly influenced by Krishnamurti. I've been in his place. And so I'm sometimes an identity question mark is for my own self as an identity. What am I? And then I have this intelligent engagement with every moment that I am into. And so sometimes life becomes even more difficult. So my question is, the locus is from there. Everything that you have said about borders outside the countries, nation states, and of course all these borders inside any particular nation state. Recently, the exercise of India trying to bring about a regional integration, I'm using these words as they appear, bringing out this regional integration where they want to really erase a border in some way or the other with every country that it has had a very bordered attitude. The Indian foreign policy, without getting too much into the details, but with every neighboring state, country, now it wants to have an integration. Somewhere energy, somewhere water, somewhere this and somewhere that. That's different. In the context of this exercise, how would you suggest, recommend, or where would your thoughts take me in this? Thank you.
Wonderful. Can I hear the other one, please? BT.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Spivak, that was a really stimulating and wonderful and thought-provoking, and as was just said by the previous lady, a very wide-ranging perspective. You come across not just as a teacher of literature. I should introduce myself. I'm also an art historian, also trained for many years in the US, and I've been very much preoccupied with the business in my own writing on borders. So your talk today about borders was very important. I just want to make a comment more than it's an observation that in the years since I am also old, and I was in the US from the 60s and the very crucial years of Vietnam, then at Chicago, but I think a lot has changed. And the whole question of empowerment of these so-called the minorities, as you call ourselves, has changed. I've seen this when I've gone back to London and when they're playing Diwali in Trafalgar Square. I've never seen it when I was there in school in England. And I think that the borderless world, the seamless world, is happening before our eyes perhaps because I refer to Arjun Apodurai's book, The Fear of Numbers, and I refer to others, but the point is that there is a tremendous change that has come about because of the number game that is happening. And whether the US likes it or dislikes it, whether the UK likes it, especially the UK, I've seen the change, there is beginning to be a different perception. So I'd like you to comment on that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'll take the third one. You in front.
First of all, I would like to thank Professor Spivak for giving us this opportunity to ask questions. My question is, in your book, Death of a Discipline, somewhere you have talked against globalization. Instead of globalization, you have put forward a new word, planetary. I want to know what does it mean by planetary, and what problems do you see with the use of the word globalization in today's context? Thank you.
Okay, to Vaijayanti, I would say, first of all, you have much greater experience. I mean, if you are in the public sector dealing with economic relations between these two regions, I mean, I can't tell you anything, but I will share the same questions and I will say what I can say. This is a very serious thing about, and it's very interesting for me because I take it you're Indian, right? Okay, so as two Indians, to be able to inhabit this critical moment is very important for me, especially outside of India. Yes, I'm a classroom teacher more than anything else, so that in a kind of a short 40-minute paper, it's hard for me to make all the qualifications. And you're right, the things I say are sometimes counterintuitive and in a contradictory relationship with something which is its opposite. If I wanted to really work on it, then I would have to go into theoretical areas which Arun knows. But briefly, I also always say that the question comes that nothing is from a vacuum. This is why I said in my talk, it's easy to say this as one of the two large countries to the small country that's between the two of them. So that was in my introductory remarks since I wrote them down. So I ask my students to ask, cui bono? Who is going to gain how from this particular move? These things, I mean, I say to them, for example, you cannot just take the statistic of people losing weight. Some are starving, some are dieting, some are on a hunger strike, some are doing some kind of religious penance, some are anorexic, some have incurable cancer, so that you cannot, in fact, simply give losing weight as a statistic. So, because everything, as I said before, unless you attend to these kinds of details, medicine turns to poison. It is within that kind of context that anything that one can say about these very broad ideas that one keeps in mind as one solves problems, all of that, this structure of questioning has to be. I'm glad you brought it up, because you really have to learn this whole structure of questioning, which people in fact know. I'm putting it like this for the student, but especially that's what I was saying about the superpower people, because the young people in the human rights at Bard, at Columbia, etc., they are not taught to ask this question. I remember calling Romila, who's even older than I and a very good friend. I was having a chat in New York with someone who's in quite a controlling position within world human rights, and she just took it for granted that the state is not accountable, because she did not have the awareness of why it was that this had come to pass. That question, cui bono, she never asked. So I called Romila. It was quite late in India, and I said, Romila, the wheel has come full circle. We fought for the state to give an account, and now these human rights folks say without a murmur, the state is not accountable. And this business of controlling this from this region and that from this region, the old kind of state capitalist way that has bitten the dust now, this business relates to that kind of making the state stronger in ways that are not commensurate with its accountability and responsibility. So yes, I would ask the question, cui bono? Who am I? This question, by the way, I'm going to make a slightly critical remark again. I just do not have any kind of positive thing about that quest. It seems to me that especially upper class women like ourselves, because of the gendering and nonsense, we become very narcissistic about this. What does it matter? I'll be dead soon. Let's just go on doing what we do. And as for the influence of Krishnamurti, as I said, I'm not religious at all in any possible way, shape, or form. But on me has come the influence of the very early Ramakrishna movement, not the movement now. My father was initiated in 1920 when he was 21 by Ramakrishna's wife. So that, and he was also not a very religious man, never talked about it at all. But Ramakrishna was like William Blake, an ecstatic. He was not a colonial subject like wonderful Vivekananda. He was a wonderful man, but nonetheless, not quite the same. And so that particular influence, the influence of that ecstatic, who would have taken on the colors of any age, whenever he was born, unlike Narendranath Datta, Vivekananda, who was born at a certain time and turned the sort of Semitization of Hinduism into good and positive directions. That's a completely different ballgame. But so that influence, someone asked me about influences yesterday, and I think that particular influence is something that also made us. So there we go. Now to come to Beatty's extraordinary question. You see, the thing is, yes, of course there are changes happening, but I would not like to agree that they have to acknowledge this, like it or not. If one looks, in my next gig, in February, I'm going to Tucson, Arizona. Why am I going? Because of the inhuman laws against so-called illegal immigration. I've just spoken in Mexico, Guadalajara, a small place close to the United States. So if one looks at the subalternization of the so-called illegal immigrant, the paperless, the sans-papiers, upon whom the economy depends, I think it would be very hard to say that the United States is changing, and the United States and Britain are not in the same place at all. If one looked at, the 19th century and the 20th is over. If one looked at the way in which Blair related to Bush, a much smarter man Blair was, but much better educated. On the other hand, he related to Bush like a toady. And that, to an extent, reflects what has happened in terms of the relationship between these two countries. And it does seem to me that what we think of as acceptance, because there's Diwali in Trafalgar Square, is not really a mark of anything. If one, I'll tell you just a little story, which it means perhaps nothing, but literary folks, I'm not an art historian, I'm a literary person, a word person. Literary folks pay attention to this kind of detail. If I say, just in a mischievous way, my mother was American, because of course all my good politically correct friends, whatever color, they think that the US is accepting and rainbow coalition and Diwali in New Jersey. But they immediately think, and they'll say, oh yes, that's why you're so tall and you have such broad shoulders. They think I mean a white woman. It's just intrinsically, this is what is still there. So the Euro-American is unmarked. UNESCO, I'm supposed to be a world philosopher. I've never had a philosophy course, either undergraduate or graduate. I can't philosophize, but I like a certain kind of philosophy. Okay, if they want to tell me I'm a world philosopher, I go for fieldwork. So they're playing music. So I said to the guy, I like European classical music. So I said, well, why don't you ever play anything from European tradition? So he says to me, it's not traditional. So Europe has history and we have tradition. The entire Nara document that 1994 Japan brought out, so that, there's this huge industry, so-called protecting cultural heritages in a kind of menagerie, precisely denying that there has been mixture, and then the intellectuals, like my dear friend Arjun, they will say something about which I take a very strong stand, this so-called vernacular cosmopolitanism. I think it's a real middle-class scandal. And this is political society also, Partha Chatterjee. The middle class likes to say that there are nice things among the poor, and critique of governmentality, when there are millions of people who have no access to the structures, the abstract structures of government. These people are sitting in their studies in Calcutta and criticizing governmentality. I think it's a disgrace. So to that extent, I'm not, in fact, my experience is not one of acceptance happening. It's very class-hatched. And one more thing, and then I'll go to yours. For example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is translated into every language. in the most bogus, at the most bogus level. There is no way that anyone, for example, just from my own experience, anyone on at the bottom layers in Bengal would understand a word of the Bengali translations of the World Health Organization and the Universal Declaration. Why? How do I know? Because I know. That's where I work. So that is another acceptance thing. The Afghan constitution, it says in English, and then every place, please consult the Dari original. Now, because of the fact that I am a Bengali speaker and know my native tongue fairly okay, not as well as a Bengalist would know, I can move along, if it's not written in Arabic or Farsi script, I can move along with Farsi a little bit with, Hamid Dabashi, who's my friend, who constantly insists that I must know Persian because I understand so much. If you go look at the Dari constitution, which I then did, you can be absolutely sure that it was originally written in English, because all of the thing, that Qawm becomes ethnic group and so on and so forth. You can see that this is not, you have to attend to detail. So this entire upper class move toward tolerance, as they say it, teaching tolerance, does not reflect what is really happening. And I must also say that the white working class is also taking a beating at the lowest, the permanent casuals and so on. So it's not really race fixed. And I think the way in which these menageries of cultural heritages are being preserved, one has to ask a question. I mean, if one looks at bending it like Beckham, is that bending it? What is it called? I never saw it. Bend it like Beckham. I mean, it really did not reflect what's happening in India today, and everybody who saw it in New York City thought it was a picture of India. So to an extent, I think this has to be also examined, although I do agree that times have changed from the 60s. And then finally, about planetarity. Planetarity is, I talked about planetarity to the Swiss, because, I mean, you cannot take away the word globalization. It's not in your hands. It's happening. It's been happening forever. When I was writing in 82, 83, it wasn't a common buzzword. So I would write electronification of the stock exchanges. I would write this kind of stuff, right? And then very quickly I saw what I was writing about was, okay. Now, so that's, my position is not that we must revise the word. The word is here. We must look at the word as a word and how it is working, like the word development. I mean, Mahashita Devi non-stop describes these people as pichiye pora jati. I think that's a disgrace. This gives to these people this idea that they are pichiye pora. And development, they're onunnoto. Onunnoto means they're not like Homo sapiens. Their heads are like this. So what are the words about, Golokayon, Bishayon, etc. The planet think is a completely different thing. I said to the Swiss, because they think that they're the original, the Swiss, see, I'm generalizing. I said to the Stiftung Dialogik people that in order to really take a distance, you should think that the planet does not care if the human race is extinct. Insofar as we are on the planet, it's not planetary resources, be environmental, etc. That's not what I'm talking about. I used the wrong word. People have thought this was what I was talking about. I was talking about the fact that like you are talking about borderlessness being, now he's gone, I think. You're talking about borderlessness as being, like impractical. The idea of saving the resources with so-called sustainable development of the planet, thinking of it as a natural space, is also, again, you're either a fool or a knave. There's a lot of stuff written on this. I was saying that if you really think planet, borderless, right, then you will know that the planet, and I used a very Spivakian turgid phrase, is in the species of alterity, I wrote. Why? Because, as my English teacher colleagues certainly know here, there is an old Latin tag which is in the species of eternity. So when you actually say something, I was talking about borderlessness in the species of eternity, sub specia aeternitatis. That is a common Latin tag. And so I just rewrote it as in the species of alterity. In other words, you cannot make a plus minus on the planet. You are on the planet. There is no self-consolidating minus over against this. What? Outer space? No. So from that point of view, It is a curb on the vanity of human wishes. You can't do anything with planetarity. That's the whole thing. Laurie Anderson, as I quoted in that very phrase, she said that she liked being the resident artist at NASA because at NASA she felt that human beings were worms. Now the thing is, that's not my language, right? But at the same time, the critique of humanism is a strong one, that we have forgotten since possessive individualism, which is all I hear, even if it's called, African or Nepalese, it's a travestied possessive individualism from a certain class speaking nationalism. We have forgotten that the planet is not ours. We are on holiday on the planet, and the planet will do what it does. We can go on playing our games, but if we are extinct, it'll just be the rule of the planet. So to that extent, that's planetarity. I've just written an entry for a book that's coming out of Princeton, Dictionary of Untranslatables. Planetarity is in there, and for those of you who are interested in this kind of move, it's very theoretical. I love Kant, and I've looked at planetarity both from what Kant would call a dogmatic and from a critical point of view. I hope some of you will read this, edited by Emily Apter, and tell me when next we meet as to what you think about that idea. But that's a very harsh idea. Grihitameva kesheshu mrityuna. That's planetarity. So, is that it? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Because I think this relates to new media technologies. My name is Dharma Adhikari from the Media Foundation, with the Media Foundation. So we talked a lot about the wordless world. Do you think new technologies are hindering or
Helping
in tearing down the wordless?
You mean IT, yes? Well, I think, again, medicine poison. I mean, some of you have seen this. The real kind of super heads of all these IT things in California send their children to a school where there's no computer at all. This made, and hackers, like first-class hackers who get into the federal government and so on and so forth, they take their notes with pencil on small cards. Because those who really are at the top know, those who really know, the real complicated programmers, that there is no distant learning for developing. The people who write about uploading, how our head computers will upload all of that, the real neural network scientists never write like that. The people who write like that are, popular writers. So to an extent, that when it is, I'm not a technophobe at all. I'm all for using the digital resources for the places where they are. But the Facebook culture is not a substitute for democracy. You should read the blogs, mindless and stupid. That's not, so you shouldn't think that undeveloped minds can use, it's like the New York artists used to say, monkeys with car keys. So that was their phrase. So to an extent, the IT is a fantastic thing. And certainly in terms of the movement of money, the movement of medicine, the movement of all kinds of things that need to be moved fast, and all kinds of calculations that need to be made, it's wonderful. Research has not been helped by what in Hindi is called Googlana. You cannot, in fact, do the kind of research, except for statistical research, except for those kinds of very broad quantitative comparative research. It's so one needs to know how to use this thing, this genie out of the lamp. And that's not coming. There was only one person on British TV who dared to say something, Indian British, about the $45 iPod or iPad or whatever it's called. And he was not asked back again. But I'm very glad you asked that question. I think it's a fantastic thing. But it's really, one needs really to know. I do not have a web page for my schools because I do not want interference with people who are giving computers. Before you know how to use it critically, there are computers in my area, here and there. What do they use it for? Pornography or gambling? You have to know, you have to have a mind that wants to do certain kinds of things in order to use the IT stuff. So I would say carry on. And okay, one more thing. Africa. I was moving around, and what we are trying to do is I want there to be a kind of thing. You see, this foreign direct investment by foreign universities, the university is completely corporatized here and there. That to me is scary. And I'm very quixotic in this. So I was calling on the people in Africa I'm fortunate enough to have as friends, and in high places educationally, also politically wonderful people. And we're trying to see if there can't be some kind of a consortial thing among 5 great, 4 old, 1 new African universities, not just this kind of nonsense, Columbia Global Centers, which is basically Jeffrey Sachs giving clean water. So in terms of this work, I said to the new university, Kwara State, I said, look, you are doing IT, you're new, you must do all kinds of new things. But in Africa, with the languages, my friend there who's now gone, there are so many mother tongues which cannot be taught because they are very local, and only the primary school teachers can use those mother tongues. And then when they come into the cities to go to school, high school and university, there are these big African languages, Yoruba, Swahili, etc., and of course also the old imperial language, which they must learn. And so when the PhDs and so on, they're speaking in their mother tongue from the village, one person understands 30%, another person understands 40%. Why? Because it's like Dante's Italy. They have not been grammatized yet. When Dante writes vulgar eloquence, he's talking about Latin Creole, the languages that we call Italian. So this thing is like that. And I said to them, look, think in the digital age, and in no other age could I have said this, think of this as a miracle, that this has been preserved. And since you are going to have an IT center which will be good, you knew Kwara State University, not Ibadan and Ghana Legon and so on, you should use this by hiring competent people so that the entire linguistic landscape, mother tongues with this kind of division, can be digitalized. Now, who could do it except IT? And I said that this would become a consortial resource, not only for Africa, but for the world. So there are, and they're going on. I mean, we're looking, I'm going to have a discussion also tomorrow. Is tomorrow 23rd? Yes, later, tomorrow, no, 22nd. Day after tomorrow, that Goredke, etc., late at night, about how this can be actually funded. So, therefore, yes, there are things that IT can do that are fantastic. But on the other hand, let us not be digital idealists and mistake it because Hart and Negri remembered the faxes from Tiananmen Square. Let's not think of that as a substitute for democracy. It can be done only the old way, rearranging desires uncoercively, slowly, carefully, with deep language learning. No, there is no other way. On the 10th anniversary of 9/11, there was a UN thing where neuroethical ethicists, neuroscientists were invited to tell us how we could have a new ethics so that this kind of thing wouldn't happen. We were invited as kind of ethnocultural agenda to listen to them in the front row. What was really interesting was that all of the serious neuroscientists said, you cannot get ethics out of neuroscience. They said, like you can't look at the time in terms of the theory of relativity. There are things that you can use for those kinds of things, for which you have to assume a human being like this. You cannot really do genomics and go into the ethical questions. So that's a grounding error too, because we know that human beings are not that anymore, right? So, but nonetheless, you have to assume that. So those are my thoughts. I'm very glad you asked this question because it's a very important question. What do we do with the so-called simultaneity, contemporaneity brought in by the silicon chip in the interest of a certain kind of globe? Our task is damage control so that we can indeed use that wonderful thing as a medicine rather than as a killer. So thank you for your question.
members of the academia, friends from IACER, members of the corporate world, representatives of the media, and all distinguished guests for participating in this wonderful program. Taking this thought forward, the thought of Dabar Excellence series, we commit to have many such interactions in future. Thanks once again. May I request all to kindly join for lunch.
We were together in Dhaka, South Asian Court of Women, and Bhopal.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I was reading.
I know, and you went with that woman, and we were saying, what's happening to Gopal? She's in Paris.
I was reading the Kathmandu Post. Reading the Kathmandu Post today. We were there. I just jumped in.
How we crossed another world, and they put us at Sonar Bangla. I had never been in a place like that.
I didn't stay there. I stayed with those
of course, I don't know where you stayed. But the thing is that I had never stayed in Sonar Bangla, not before, not after. Totally didn't recognize
Where have you been?
Morita Dynamics.